quick demo of this video. Here we'll discuss how to perform CRUD operations in a mean stack application. This is the final output of this video. In it we have implemented operations like insert, update and delete on employee details. Existing employees are listed inside this table. Now to insert a new employee, fill up the form here. Now submit the form. So here we have inserted the new employee Steve Jones. To update an existing record, select the employee. Corresponding employee details will be populated here. Then make the required changes inside the form. Click on submit. That's it. Finally, to delete a record, click on this trash icon here and confirm the operation. That's it. Since we have built this project from scratch, you won't miss anything unexplained. Hence, please watch till the end of the video. Hi all, welcome to CodAffection. In one of our previous video, we have discussed the same topic with all versions of the framework. If you try the same with latest versions, it won't work as expected. So I decided to make the same video again with latest Angular 15. Before going forward, I would like to thank for your donations through PayPal and other platforms for my previous works. In order to make more and more quality tutorials like this, you can also support me through PayPal or other platforms. Details are given in video description. Now without further ado, let's get started with the topic. In a mean stack application, we have the server side and client side. Inside the server, we have the Node.js framework, then MongoDB and the Express server. In our previous video, we have already developed the server-side Node.js part. So I strongly recommend you to watch that video first, where I have implemented the CRUD operations using the web methods post, put, get and delete. I have given the link in video description and inside the iCard top right corner. Now in this video, I'm completing the mean stack application by adding its front end in latest Angular 15. Now the reason for splitting this discussion into server side and client side is that we can extend this topic into other web stacks. For example, using the same server side API, I can add a client side in React like this. So that becomes a main stack application. Or I can use any front-end framework or JavaScript view engines to develop or complete the entire application. So by reusing the same server side API, we can accomplish a lot of things. So instead of combining them into one video, I found this is much better. Hope you understood. So in this video, we are adding a client side for the existing server side API and it becomes a mean stack application. Alright, now let's go ahead with this Angular frontend. Now without further ado, let's get started with building the frontend in Angular. Before that, I will paste the same server-side Node.js API which we have created in our previous video. So here we have the server-side Node.js API built with MongoDB. Now inside the same folder directory, let's create an Angular frontend. For that, first of all, we have to open the command prompt from the same folder directory. So you could use the shortcut. Just replace this folder path with the command cmd, then hit enter, and thereby the command prompt will be opened from the same folder directory here. To create the Angular project, you could use this command ng new, the name of the application, it would be client. Hit enter. Would you like to add routing for this application? Type n for no. Which style sheet format would you like to use? I will stick with CSS. Currently it is installing some default npm packages to the application. So it will take some time, so please be patient. Finally, here we have done with the creation of Angular project. As a result of that, you could see a new folder here with the same name as that of this project, Angular project client. Now let's navigate into the new folder client. Now let's open the same inside the VS Code editor. So here we have the brand new Angular 15 project open in VS Code. Now to run this application, let's open this terminal and let's execute this Angular CLI command. It will compile this project and open the same in your default web browser. So this is how the fresh Angular project looks like. Now let's start customizing as per our requirement. For that, first of all, we are going to add the Bootstrap style sheet into the project. So go to the official website getbootstrap.com. Inside the website, you could see the style sheet link reference here. Let's copy this style sheet link tag and then back to the project, open index.html. Just paste that just above this head end tag. As you know, in any Angular project, by default, this index.html contains the HTML wrapping for rest of the components inside the application. That's why we are importing this global style sheet for Bootstrap inside this index.html. Now, along with Bootstrap, we also need the phone awesome icons. So I will search for phone awesome CDN reference. I often copy the CDN reference from this cdnjs.com. From this given list, we need this all.min.css. So let's copy paste this link tag here. Now in any Angular project, there will be a default component called app. Here is the corresponding component TypeScript file, and here is the corresponding component HTML. You could see the corresponding component selector here, and the same is used inside this index.html body tag. So the default view of the application inside this website is because of this component, app component, and its HTML file here. So first of all, let's clear everything inside this app component HTML. First of all, we have the div with the class container from Bootstrap. And then here we have the raw div. Now in order to sender the same div, we can use this Bootstrap class justify content sender. Inside that we have the Bootstrap grid layout with 8 columns. Now everything inside this application will be displayed here. Now before going forward, let's discuss the structure of the application that we are going to build. For that, I'm going to add a text file here called app structure. Now let me paste the structure of the application here. So here we have the root index.html. Inside that we have already added the CDN reference for both Bootstrap and phone awesome icons. And here we have the default app module. You could see the corresponding TypeScript file here. As you know, Angular projects are module based. So this is the default app module, and everything related to this module will be there inside this app folder here. And where we have this default component, app component here. Now, as per this app structure, we have to create 2 components, which are employees and employee form. This employees component will be the parent to this employee form component. Inside this form component, we'll be designing the form for the operations, and the inserted employees will be listed inside this parent component here. Now to create the component, let's open the terminal. Now execute this Angular CLI command ng g for generate, c for component, the name of the component, which is employees. Now if we execute this command here, it will create 4 components, as you can see in case of this default app component. One for style sheet, one for HTML, one for the test purpose with the extension spec.ts, and here we have the original TypeScript file for the component. So these 4 files will be created with a command like this. Inside this application, for a component, we only need 2 files. One is the original TypeScript file and its corresponding HTML file. In order to do so here we have the documentation on the command starting with ng generate. We need to create a component. In order to skip the component specific style sheet, you could use this option here, inline style. In short, you can use this alias here. And to skip the corresponding test file, you could use this option skip test. Now hit enter. Boom. So here we have the new component employees with those 2 HTML and TypeScript files. Now let's create this employees form component as a child to the existing employees component. For that, you could reuse the previous command like this. Just use the upward arrow. So here we have the previously executed command, and we just need to modify it accordingly. This time we have to create a component with the name employee form, and that will be created inside this folder employees here. Hit enter. So here we have the new component employee form. Now we have to create a service class and a model class for the employee inside this folder shared. For that, first of all, let me clear this terminal here. First of all, let's create the service class ng g for generate, s for service. You could check the corresponding command inside this documentation. We have to create a service class, and you could see the corresponding arguments and options. Now we have to provide the name of the service class, which is employee. Since we want to create this service class inside this folder shared, we have to provide that here like this, shared/employee. And for this service class also, we want to skip the corresponding test file. For that, we can use the same option here. There you go. So here we have the new folder shared. Within that we have the TypeScript file for the employee service class. Now let's create this employee model class. Unfortunately, there is no specific command for creating model class in Angular. So we'll be using the CLI command for creating the class here. So here we go, ng generate a class. In short, we just need to provide CL, the name of the class, which is employee. In case of a model class, the appropriate extension would be like this, model.ts. In order to name it accordingly, we will be using the options listed here. That is, this option type can be used like this. Type is equal to model. And here also we have to skip the test file, so I will include this option here. Now since we want to create this model class inside this shared folder, we have to prefix that just before this model name here. So shared/employee. Hit enter. That's it. Inside this shared folder, you could see the model class with the extension model.ts. So here we have done with the app structure. Let's continue with the design of the application. At last, we have modified this app component HTML. As I said already, all the components inside this application will be shown inside this grid 8 columns here. So I'll be showing this parent component employees, and you could see the corresponding selected. So here we go, app employees. Now you could see the default text from the component employees works. First of all, let's add a title for the application. So here we have the div, and let's apply these bootstrap classes. Text bg dark. It will apply a dark background and an appropriate text color also. And in order to center the text inside that, we can apply this class text center, and let's make the bottom corners rounded. For that, we can apply this class rounded bottom. Inside that we have this header, h1 header, having this bootstrap class display for. Since we are dealing with employee details inside this application, I will provide the app title as employee register. And for this outer div, let's apply vertical padding on y-axis of the range 4. Now after the app title, we have to show a form for insert and update operation and a table for listing existing collections of employees. For that, first of all, we have this div apply padding on all sides of the range 4. Inside that, we'll be using the bootstrap grid system. We'll split the div into two halves, equal halves. Inside this first column, we'll be showing the employee form. For that, we can make use of this child component here, employee form. So the corresponding selector would be app employee form. And inside the second column, we'll be showing list of existing employees. First of all, let's design the form inside this child component here, employee form. For designing a form in Angular, there are two approaches. One is using template-driven approach. That's what I have been using in most of my previous tutorials. But in this project, I'll be using the second method, which is called as reactive forms approach. For that, first of all, we have to import the corresponding module inside this app module.ts file. So here we go, reactive forms module. It's already shown inside this auto suggestion here. So if you click on it, corresponding import statement will be added at the top. Now back to the form component. Now before going forward, let's define this employee model class here. For that, let's check the Node.js server API that we have already created in our previous video. So here we have the Node.js server API. Let me open that inside the VS Code editor. You could see the corresponding model here. Now I'm going to copy the same into our Angular project. Let's paste it over here. So these properties are defined as per the JavaScript syntax. Now when it comes to TypeScript, we have to make few modifications here. Now these three properties are of the type string. So let's replace this object. In order to select the same object from following lines, we can use this shortcut here. Hold Control then press D. So this will select the same selection from following lines. Now we can replace them simultaneously. So here we go, string. So here we have defined these three properties as string, and we want to initialize them with empty string like this. Now you could move these cursors all together back and forth using left and right arrow like this. Since I want to delete this comma at the end, I will press delete and let's put a semicolon here. Now this salary will be of the type number, and let's initialize that with 0. Now unlike this Node.js model class, inside the Angular model here, we need an additional property in order to retrieve or deal with this primary property here, underscore ID from MongoDB collection. So here we go, underscore ID of the type string, and let's initialize that with an empty string like this. Now here we have defined the employee model. Now we know what are the input controls we need inside this employee form. In this main stack tutorial, I'm not going to explain the basics of reactive forms approach. If you want to understand it properly, you can head over to this official documentation. You could see the documentation here under developer guides, forms, reactive forms approach. Now inside this employee service class, I will be creating an instance of form builder object. Since we are creating it inside this service class, it could be shared across these parent and child components, and that will be necessary as per the data flow inside this application. For that, first of all, we have to inject the form builder like this, form builder, in short FB, which is of the type form builder. Select the auto suggestion here, and thereby the corresponding import statement will be added at the top. So here we have the property employee form. Now we are going to create a form builder object with the injected form builder here. So this .fb.group method can be called. Inside that, we will be passing an object like this. Inside this object, we have to add properties corresponding to each form control that we are going to add here. To make it simple, I will copy paste the properties from this employee model class. So I'll be using the shortcut for multiple selection, which is Hold Control then press D. So it will select the same selection in following lines like this. Now let's assign an array here, and let's add a colon at the end. Let's do the same for this salary also. Now as a first element inside this array, we can assign the default value of these input controls. Now for these controls, I will assign empty string as the initial value. For that, we can use the multiple cursor feature from VS Code. So just hold Alt, then select the places where you want to add cursors. So here we go, and just type the empty string. And for this primary key, the initial value will be null. We could configure these properties corresponding to the form control further by adding more elements into this array. We will see that in a bit while implementing validation inside the form. For now, let's keep it simple. So here we have a form builder object as employee form. Now using this form builder, we could design a form inside this employee form component here. For that, first of all, inside this component, we have to inject the employee service class. So here we have the constructor. Let's inject the service class publicly. So service, which is of the type employee service class. Now with this injected service, we can access this form builder object here. So head over to the component HTML here. We need a form element having this bootstrap class row. We don't need this action attribute. Now for each label input pair, we will be having this div wrapping, having these classes called 12, and let's apply a bottom margin of the range 3. First of all, we'll be having a label with the bootstrap class form label. We don't need this for attribute here. Now this is for full name. Now let's add a corresponding text box. So input having these classes form control. In order to make it large, we will add an additional class form control LG. By default, this type attribute will be having the value text, so we don't need this here. Now let's add a placeholder saying that enter your full name. Now we need to bind this form element and its input controls to the form builder object here. First of all, we'll bind the form builder to this form element using the directive form group. Since we have injected this employee service as service inside the component, we could do this service.employee form. Now in order to bind this input control to the corresponding property full name here, we could do this form control name is equal to full name. Now let's check how this form looks like. So here we have the label text box pair for full name. Now in order to verify whether this form and its elements are binded to this form control or not, let's assign some random text as a default value here, and let's save this back to the app. That's it. So we are perfectly binded form builder object to its form elements here. Now let me duplicate this label text box div for other properties. Just copy paste this 3 times below. This is for location. Now corresponding property from this form builder must be provided inside its input control form control name. Now let's change the placeholder accordingly. Now this is for position or designation. And let's assign the corresponding property here, position. Finally, we have salary. Corresponding property is salary. Since we are dealing with salary inside this input control, we want to change the type of this text box as number. Now this is how the form looks like. In order to shrink the form a little bit, I will place both of these position and salary text box controls in a single row. So instead of applying 12 columns, we'll apply 6 columns to both of these divs here. Now let's add the submit button. For that, here we have the div with 12 columns, and here we have the button with bootstrap classes btn. In order to make it large, we can add this class btnlg. In order to apply the primary color, we can have this class btn primary. And this button is of the type submit. So here we have the submit button. Now this is how the button looks like. Now in order to expand the button to the available width of this form, we can add this bootstrap class display grid. So the button is expanded in the available space here. Now in order to customize the appearance of these form elements, I'm gonna add some custom CSS rules to the global style sheet styles.css. Since it is straightforward, I will just paste them here. First of all, we have customized the form labels, then form input control, then placeholder, and the submit button. Now let's check how this form looks like. Boom, that's it. Alright, now let's go ahead with this form submit event. So here we have the form submit is equal to on submit. Now let's define this function inside the TypeScript file here. Now first of all, let me log the values of form controls using the form builder object. So this dot service dot employee form dot value property can be used. So this property contains the value from different controls inside the form. Now let's check whether it works or not. First of all, let me open the developer console. Let's enter some random values here. Submit the form. That's it. See, here we have the properties corresponding to these form controls and the populated values in it. So here we have implemented the form submit event. Now before posting this form data to corresponding Node.js server API, we have to validate this form here. So first of all, let's define the validation rules inside the service class form builder object. In order to show you the same, I'm gonna make these properties full name, then position and salary as mandatory. So we can pass the validation rules as a second item inside the array here. For that, we can make use of this validated class from Angular forms dot required. That's it. Now let's pass the same for rest of these properties, position and salary. Now since we have created this form using reactive forms approach, the state and values of this form and its controls can be retrieved from this form builder object. Hence, if you want to verify whether this form as a whole is valid or not, you could make use of this form builder object. For example, inside this form submit event, we want to verify whether this form as a whole is valid or not. Let me copy paste this. Instead of this value property, there is a boolean property called valid. So this will get executed only if the form is valid. So as per the validation rules given here, these three properties, full name, position and salary, must be provided inside the form. Now in order to verify the same, let me open the console tab here. Now if I submit this empty form, we are not getting anything printed inside this console. Now let's provide some random values inside this form, submit the form, see. Now this log statement is getting executed because this form is valid. Now let's try this case where no value is provided for the position control. For that, first of all, I will clear this console tab, no position given here, submit the form. Log statement is not getting executed because this form is not valid right now. So this form as a whole will be valid when all of these required fields are populated. See? Now if you want to give some indications where a particular control is not valid, for that we need to understand some basics. Let me reload this page here and let's inspect these controls. So currently here we have the input control for this full name. These classes are given from our HTML component page, and rest of these classes starting with ng are given by the Angular framework itself. Ng pristine indicates whether this control is changed from its default value or not. While loading this page, if the control is having some value ABC, if we change that, this class will be changed to ngDirty, and this class indicates whether this particular control is valid or not, and this last class indicates whether we have interacted with the particular control or not. Since we have placed the cursor inside the control, currently we have this class ngText. Now if we check the corresponding class for other input controls, you could see that it is having this class ngUntext. So these three ng classes indicates the state of the control inside this user interface. By default, when a fresh form is loaded, this full name control is having the class ngInvalid because as per the rule it must be mandatory. So currently it is invalid. So for the proper indication of validation errors of these controls, apart from this ngInvalid class, we need another parameter. For example, if I submit this form, it is not valid as a whole and these three controls are invalid, isn't it? So it's better to show the validation errors only after the submit event. So in order to verify whether we have submitted or not, I'm gonna add an extra property inside this here, employee form, and let's add the Boolean property submitted, which is of the type boolean. By default it will be having the value false. Now inside this submit event I will set the same property like this. Now based on the value of this property, we can add a custom class to this form here. Thereby we could easily show the error indication to corresponding controls. Now in order to apply a class on a given condition, we could do this class, then the class that we want to be applied. So it will be a CSS class submitted, and this will be applied only when this property submitted here is true. So if this property is true, this class will be applied to this form here, otherwise the class will not be there. Initially you won't see the class here submitted because this form is freshly loaded. Now if I submit the form, you could see the class submitted. So here we have the class submitted applied because of this condition here. But along with that, you could see an Angular class ng submitted. It is automatically added by the Angular framework itself. We are not depending on the ng version of submitted class because we don't have the full control over the ng version. For example, in some cases we may need to remove the submitted state of the form. For example, if you want to reset this form, we may need to remove this submitted class. We can easily do that by resetting the corresponding property submitted here. Now based on the presence and absence of these classes submitted and ngInvalid, we can say whether a form control is invalid or valid. So that will be done inside the global style sheet styles.css. So here it is. So first of all, we will check the classes applied to the form element. If the form as a whole is invalid, it will be having this class ngInvalid. You could see the same here, gInvalid. And then the custom class submitted. If the form is having both of these classes and the containing input element having this class ngInvalid, we will be changing its border color. Let me save this back to the application. The form is freshly loaded right now. Let's try to submit the form. Boom, that's it. So the form is having these classes ngInvalid and submitted, and the containing form elements having the class ngInvalid is having the red border here. So that's all about the form validation. Now as part of the CRUD operations, first of all we are going to implement insert operation inside this mean stack application. For that, we have to submit this form data from the form submit event here to the Node.js server API, which I have already opened in my second desktop here. And here we have the corresponding MongoDB collection. As part of testing the CRUD endpoints inside the Node.js server API, we have inserted few records here. Now let's try to insert the same from our Angular frontend. For that, first of all, I will start this Node.js server API here like this. Node-mon index.js. So here we have successfully started the Node.js server API. Now in order to insert a new record, as we have discussed in our previous tutorial, we have to make a post request to this controller post method here. The form data from this form here will be passed as a request body, and that will be passed to the Mongoose library for inserting the same to the MongoDB collection. Now before doing that, let's check whether it reached up to the Node.js server API or not. So I will comment this create method invocation, and let's have this log statement to check whether the request body is receiving the same that we have sent from our Angular frontend. So back to the Angular client side. Now let's make the HTTP post request from this onSubmit method. For that, first of all, into this app-module.ts file, we have to import HTTP client module. So here we have the corresponding import statement from Angular common/HTTP. We have to import HTTP client module. Now let's add the same inside this imports array. Now back to the component. Instead of making the post request directly from this component, I'm going to do that inside this service class. First of all, let's inject the HTTP client here, private HTTP of the type HTTP client. Now let me add a read-only property for saving the base URL of the Node.js server API. So here it is, read-only base URL. Now as per this Node.js server API here, inside this index.js, we have started this server at the port number 3000. And here we have the following base URL /API/employees. Into that, we just need to concat these strings in various endpoints here. So in order to make a GET request to this route here, we just need to append the / here. So we can do this localhost 3000 /API/employees. And here we have the /, hit enter. So here we have made a GET request to this route here, and thereby it returns all of the existing records from the DB collection here. Now back to the Angular project. So we were discussing about the base URL. Now let me copy this. So this is the base URL for employee related request. Now I'm going to create a method called post employee. In order to make any HTTP request, we can make use of this injected instance here. So this .http.post method can be called. As a first parameter, we have to pass the corresponding URL. So this .base URL. If you check the post endpoint inside this Node.js server API, you could see that we just need to add a / after this employees here that we have saved inside this base URL. So we don't have to append anything to this base URL here. Now as a second parameter, we can pass the body of the request. That will be the data that we have submitted from the form here. So that can be retrieved with this form builder object. So here we go, this .employee form.value. So this will make a post request to the running Node.js server API here. Okay, and this post method is returning an observable, which you can see here. It returns an observable, and that will be returned from this service class like this. Now we are going to call this method from our controller here. Instead of logging this value from data, let's call the post method here. So this .service.post employee. Now let's subscribe to the observable return from the method. So here we have the success callback. Inside that, I will just print this got the response. Let me save this. Back to the form. Let's enter some random values here. Submit the form. Let's open the console tab here. Here we have a problem. It's a security feature implemented by Node.js Server API itself, through which an application hosted in a different domain or different port number can't access its resources. For example, the Node.js Server API is running at the port number 3000, but we are trying to consume its endpoints from this port number 4200. So such type of request will be blocked by the CORS policy, Cross Origin Resource Sharing. Now we have to configure this Node.js Server API in order to receive requests from this port number 4200. So let's do that inside this Node.js Server API index.js. For that, first of all, we have to import this package CORS. Now let's copy this installation command here. Open the terminal. I'm going to execute the same here. Once it is successfully installed, let's import this same inside this index.js course from course package. Now using this package, we can configure the middleware here. app.use method can be called, and let's call this method course from the package. Into that, we just need to pass this object. Within this origin property, pass the root URL of the Angular app. So here it is. Make sure to avoid this / at the end. Now the place where we call this course method is really important. If you invoke this course method after the routes that we have provided here, it won't work as expected. So make sure to invoke this method course before any routes inside the application. Let me save this, back to the app, clear the console, submit the form again. Even though we submitted the form, the log statement is not getting executed, saying this message got the response. It's because inside this Node.js server API, we are not returning anything back to the caller. We are just printing the body that we have sent into the Node.js server API. So it should be seen inside this first terminal here, where we are running this Node.js server API. So here we have the object that we have sent from the form submit event. So the data that we have sent from the Angular frontend is reaching up to this server API here. Now here we have something we must aware of. Inside this posted object, we have an additional ID property which we have not expected while developing this Node.js server API here. If we post this object here, this ID will be added to the MongoDB collection that we have here. We don't have to provide the value for the ID while inserting the record. It's automatically generated by the MongoDB itself. So in order to avoid such unwanted properties from the request body received here, I'm going to define a separate object here, new record. So here we go. Full name is equal to request.body.fullname. Now we have to do this for rest of the 3 properties. So I will copy paste this 3 times. Now using the shortcut multi-select, let me select both of these full name from both of the ends, position, location, and salary. Now instead of passing the request body as it is, we can pass this new object here. Now let's uncomment this create method invocation. We had the same expectation for the update operation also. We are directly updating the request body that we have received inside this put web method. So instead of that, I'm going to copy paste this here to the put web method. Let's rename this as updated record. So it doesn't consist the ID property. It will be passed as a request parameter through the ID. Now instead of passing the request body, let's pass this object updated record. That's all. So let me save this and back to the Angular frontend. So this method post employee is making the request to the Node.js server API, and it returns the observable, and it is handled inside this submit event here. Now if the request is successful, we'll get this message printed inside the console tab. Now before testing that, let's handle the error inside this HTTP post request. We'll do that in general so that we can use them for other HTTP requests also. For that, first of all, we'll define a generic method like this. You could see the same method inside the official documentation here under developer guides, HTTP clients, handle error. I'm going to copy paste the same into this employee service class here. Let's import the corresponding classes. So first of all, it will check whether we have any error status code. If there is none, it will print the error object along with the message and error occurred. If there is an error status code, it will print the status code along with the body. Finally, it will throw an error like this. Now any error while making an HTTP request can be handled with this generic method like this. We just need to call this pipe method. Inside that, we can call this method catch error from RxJS, and inside that we can pass the method error handler. That's it. So the error will be handled inside this method. If the request is successful, it will be handled within this subscribe callback. Let's try that. Back to the form. So here is the new employee details. Now before submitting the form, let me open the console tab, submit the form. Boom, that's it. So here we have the message that we have printed from the success callback. Let's check whether we have a new employee with the name Daniel Hacker. So let's switch to the second desktop. Let's reload this. Currently we only have these 2 employees. See, here we have the new employee with the name Daniel Hacker. That's it. Now we have to reset the form controls after the successful operation. So I'm going to define another method here, reset form. In order to reset the form, we can make use of this form builder object employee form. So this dot service dot employee form dot reset method can be called. Now along with that, we have to reset the submitted property with false. Hi all, I'm coming from future, meaning that the change I'm about to make is done after completing this project. Because in order to reset the form, just calling this method reset from the form builder is not enough. With this reset form method, the properties corresponding to the control will be initialized with null. That's not what we want. We want to initialize those controls or the properties with the default values. For that, we will pass a fresh instance of this employee model here. So here we go, new employee, that's it. Now let's call the method here, this dot reset form. Next, we are going to retrieve all of the existing employees and list them inside the second div here. So that will be done inside the parent component employees component. So here we have the corresponding HTML. Inside the first div, we have shown the child component employee form where we have designed this form. Now inside the second div, we have to list existing employees. So first of all, let's retrieve all of the employees collection inside the service class here. So let me declare this array list, which is of the type employee model. And let's initialize that with an empty array like this. Now let's retrieve all of the existing employees into this array. For that, we have to consume this node.js server API get web method here. So back to the client side, I'm going to define a new method, fetch employee list. In order to make the get request, we just need to call this get method here. Into that, as a first parameter, pass the URL, which is exactly same as that of this base URL. Now if there is any error, we can handle that like we have done here. So let me copy paste this. Now for this get request, we'll be handling the success response here. So subscribe. So here we have the callback function with the single parameter data. It consists of a list of employees returned from this get request. Now we just need to assign that to the list array that we have just created. So let's assign the parameter data and let's convert it as an array of employees. That's it. Now if you want to verify whether it works or not, let's log this data here. Back to the app. Let's open the console. Sorry, we didn't invoke this method here, fetch employees. So that will be done inside this parent component ng on a lifecycle hook, meaning immediately after initializing this component. So in order to make use of the particular lifecycle hook, first of all, we have to implement the corresponding interface here on init. Now inside this method, ng on a lifecycle method, we can execute whatever we want once this component is fully loaded. In this case, we just need to invoke this method here, fetch employees. For that, first of all, we have to inject this service class inside the component. So first of all, let's add the constructor and let's inject this service as public. Now let's call the method here, this dot service dot fetch employee list. Boom, that's it, which is the response for this get request. So here we have the 3 employees that we already have inside the MongoDB collection. See, all of these employees and its primary ID is also returned inside the client side here. Now let's render the same inside the second div inside an HTML table. So here we have the parent component HTML file table having the bootstrap class table header. Now the table consists of 3 columns, one for name, one for the position, and inside the final column we'll be having button for delete operation. Now let's render the table body. For that, we'll be iterating through the service class array list of the type employee. So here we go. Here we have the tr element. Now using the directive ng4, we could do this, let employee, in short emp, of the service class array service.list. So on each iteration, the object corresponding to the employee will be there inside this property employee. Now using that, we can render the record details inside td elements like this. Now we have to wrap that inside this double curly brace. Now emp full name. So we are showing the name of the employee inside the first column. Then we have to show the position. At the last column, we'll be showing a button for the delete operation. We'll do that in a bit. Before that, let's check how this looks like. That's it. Here we have rendered all of the existing employees inside the table. Now let me get rid of the log statement for printing this array here, which is inside this service class method fetch employees here. Now let me try adding a new employee inside the form and let's check whether it is getting added to this table or not. For that, first of all, inside this component, after the form submit event, once the insert operation is successful, we have to refresh the list of employees. Since the list of employees stored inside the service class here, in order to refresh the table with the newly inserted record from this form, we just need to call this method again after the form submit event fetch employees. Thereby, the updated list of employees will be updated into the array list. Since we have injected the same employee service class inside this form component here, it is pretty simple. We just need to call it like this dot service dot fetch employee list. That's it. Now it should work as we expected. Now before trying that, I want to show a notification saying that the operation went successful. For that, we're gonna make use of this npm package. You might have already seen me using this Angular package in previous tutorials, which is ngx toaster. Let's copy the installation command. Now let's execute the same inside the project. So here we have successfully installed the package ngx toaster. You could see the further details on configuring the package inside this npm page here. First of all, make sure that you are installing the correct version of the package. Since I am using the latest Angular 15, I don't have to worry about the package version. If you are using a previous Angular version, try to use the respective package version according to this table. Now let's deal with the configuration of the package. First of all, we have to add this style sheet of the package toast.css, and that should be added into this file angular.json. So here we have the corresponding path. Let me copy this back to the project, search for angular.json. We have to add that into this array styles. So I will search for the array here, styles. There will be two arrays with the same name, one for the build and one for the test purpose. So let's add the style sheet for both of the styles. You could find that easily if you go through the search result here. So here we have the second array. Let's add the same styles here. Now since we have made this change outside this src folder, this file angular.json is outside this src folder, it's better to reload this running instance of the Angular app. To stop the running instance of the Angular app, use the shortcut Ctrl+C, then run the command again ngserve-o. Now the application is relaunched. Now back to the configuration page. Now here we have the final configuration inside the module file app.module. Here we have to import these modules, browser animations and toaster module. So let me copy both of these as it is and pasting here inside the imports array. Now we have to add the corresponding import statement. There is no auto suggestion for the import statement for this module. Now let's try the same for the toaster module. So here we have the import statement and it is added perfectly fine. Now let's explicitly copy the import statement for the browser animations module. So that's the minimum configuration to work with toaster module. Now in order to show a notification inside this form component after the insert operation, first of all we have to inject the toaster service here like this. Toaster, which is of the type toaster service class. Now here we go, this dot toaster dot success method can be called. So it will be showing a toaster message with the background green, and here we have the containing message created successfully. And the corresponding toast message will be having the title employee register. That's it. Now let's try to insert a new employee. Submit the form. Boom. That's it. So here we have successfully created a new employee. Next we are going to implement the update and delete operation. First of all, I'm going to add a button for the delete operation inside this last column using the font awesome icon. So here we have the I element with these classes from font awesome icons. So this represents a trash bin icon. In order to make it larger, we can add this for LG class, and let's apply this text color from Bootstrap. So here we have the icon for the delete operation. Now let's customize the appearance of this table. For that, open this styles.css and here we have the table styles. So for all the columns except the last column, we have changed the cursor to pointer, and we have done the same for the I element inside the last column also. And here we have changed the header text color. Now let's implement the update operation. In order to choose a record for the update operation, user must select the row from this table, and thereby we will be populating the corresponding record details inside the form here. For that, let me wire up a click event to these first two columns. So here we have the click event, and we'll handle that inside a method called populate form. Into the method, we just need to pass the corresponding record details that will be there inside this variable emp. Now let's add the same click event to the second column. Now let's define this method. So here we have the method with the parameter selector record, which is of the type employee model. In order to populate this selected record details into the form here, we only need to assign the record details inside this form builder object employee form. For that, we could do this dot service dot employee form. From that, we just need to call this method set value. Into that, we'll pass an object like this and assign the values for these properties respectively from this parameter here. So here we go. Now let's copy paste this for rest of the properties here. Okay, now we have some type mismatch with this form builder object and this model here. For salary, we are using the type number, and in case of this form builder object, we are using a string. So in order to avoid the mismatch, I will change this to string here, and let's assign an empty string. Now if it is vice versa, I want to change the type to number, and we'll be assigning 0 here and 0 here. And thereby the initial value of the salary text box will be 0. In order to avoid that, I'm assigning an empty string here. Now for this property salary, the corresponding text box is a numeric text box, so we don't have to enforce the type number for this property. And in case of this ID property, inside the form builder we have assigned null here, so it is having the type null, but inside this model we have the type string. So here we have a mismatch. We can't assign a string into a type of null. In order to avoid the problem, let's assign an empty string here. Now let's check whether it works or not. If you select any of these employee records here, corresponding details must be shown here. See? Boom! It works perfectly fine. Now in order to perform the update operation, user will make the changes inside these form controls here, and then the form will be submitted. So both insert and update operation must be handled inside the form submit event here. Now based on the value of the primary key, we could say whether we have an insert or update operation. So we'll do this insert operation if the ID is having an empty string. Now once the form is submitted, the form data will be there inside this form builder object. Now in order to retrieve a particular property from this form builder object, we can make use of this method get. Inside that we can pass the name of the property, which is _id. Now to check the containing value, let's check this property value. If it is equal to an empty string, then we can say the submitted form is a fresh form, so we have to go for the insert operation. If not, we'll do the update operation inside the else block here. Now for the update operation, inside this Node.js server API, we have this put endpoint here. Along with the base URL that we have saved, we have to pass the corresponding record ID. And inside the request body, we have to pass the updated details of the record. For that, first of all, inside the client side service class, I'm going to define a new method, put employee. Now let me copy paste this statement. Instead of post, we have to make a put request. Along with this base URL here, we have to pass the corresponding record ID appended at the end. That we can retrieve from this form builder object like I have done here. So let me copy this, append the same after the base URL, this dot employee form. Now the second argument is having the updated values from the form. Now back to the form submit event. Now let me reuse this same statement here. Instead of post employee, we have to call put employee. Now first of all, inside the success response, we have refreshed the employee list, and here we have the notification saying updated successfully. After that, we'll reset the form to its initial state. Now I'm going to check whether it works or not. Before that, I'm going to add a debugger here so that we can see what's happening in real time. Now back to the app, open the developer console. Let's try to update this record here. Let me add an asterisk mark at the end here. Submit the form. So the execution is paused at the given breakpoint. Now let's check the value of the ID. You can't directly see the value of the ID from the form builder object because we are invoking a method here. To view the exact value in it, let's copy this and let's add this inside this watch expression. Hit enter. So you could see the corresponding ID of the record here. That's what we have inside the MongoDB for the corresponding record. See, ending with 57, you could see the same ID here also. Since we are doing an update operation, the property _ID is already occupied with a non-empty string. So we'll go for the update operation here. Now let's resume this execution and let's check whether the update operation works or not. Boom. See? So here we have successfully implemented the update operation. Now let's check how to implement the delete operation inside this mean stack application. For that, back to the parent component, employees component, and let's add a click event for this I element here. We'll deal that inside this method on delete, and let's pass the corresponding ID. Now let's define the method inside the component. This method is expecting a parameter ID of the type string. Since delete is a permanent loss of data, we have to confirm the operation from user side. So here we have the if clause, JavaScript method, confirm. Inside that we'll ask this question, are you sure to delete this record? We'll only continue with the operation if user confirm this operation. Now to perform the delete operation, first of all, let's define a method inside this service class. For that, I will copy paste this put employee method and let's modify it accordingly. So here we have the method delete employee having a single parameter ID of the type string. Instead of put, we have to call this method delete. For this method, we only have to pass a single parameter, which is the respective URL. For delete operation from this Node.js application here, we want to invoke this endpoint here. And here we are only expecting the corresponding URL, which is along with the base URL, we only have to pass the corresponding ID. So inside this client side method, I'm going to append the ID here. So this will make a delete request to the server side. Now let's invoke the same inside this parent component. This .service.delete employee, and let's pass the ID here. Now let's subscribe to the returned observable, and here we have the success response. First of all, we want to refresh the existing collections of employees. So let's call this method fetch employee list. Then we want to show a notification like we have done inside the form component here. So let me copy this. For update operation, we have called the success. Instead of that, let's change it into this method info so that it will have a light blue background just to distinguish from the green background of the success message from the insert operation. So let's paste the same inside this delete method. Now we have to inject this toaster into the component. So I will copy paste the same from this form component. Here we have the constructor and here we have injected the toaster. Now let's add the corresponding import statement. Now for the delete operation, it is better to show the notification with a red background. So I will call this method error and the message would be like this: deleted successfully. Now let's check whether it works or not. In order to delete this employee Daniel Hacker, click on this trash icon here and just confirm the operation. Boom, that's it. You could see the same record deleted from this MongoDB here. Currently here we have the record Daniel Hacker. Let's refresh the collection. No employee with the name Daniel Hacker. So that's it guys, we have implemented the CRUD operations insert, update and delete inside this mean stack app. You could download or clone this project from the GitHub repository, link is given in video description. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to this channel CodAffection if you haven't yet. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. Have a nice day, bye.